Hi everyone and welcome back to Mr. Francy Reads. Today we are going to be doing a very interesting video. You guys have personally onto me and asked me to do an entry point video for your Brandon Sanderson reads. And if you know me, you know how excited that's made me. Very excited. So let's not wait any longer as I once again welcome you back to Mr. Francy Reads. Okay, so for this entry point suggestion, I thought I would break things up into 6 different categories to ensure that I'm assisting everyone that I can. Because not every reader likes the same thing, not every reader reads the same way. So, we're going to start with any Brando Sando fan what they would call the most obvious one, which is the popular entry point. This is what most Brandon Sanderson fans started with, but it doesn't mean you have to go down this path. That's just what they did, and I did the same thing. I started off with Mistborn Era 1. Here are 3 chunker books of Mistborn Era 1. If you're going down this path, you would start with my favourite book of all time, Mistborn, The Final Empire. And once you finished that book, you would move on to Mistborn book number 2, The Well of Ascension. And then, when you finish that one, you would move on to Mistborn book number 3, The Hero of Ages. These 3 books will definitely give you some sort of an idea whether Brandon Sanderson is the author or not for you. Brandon Sanderson, his heart and soul is in this series. It's very easy to work it out, either by the end of the series or by the end of even book number 1. But if you're teetering after book number 1 going, I don't know if I like Sanderson or not, continue on with the series and then determine if he is the author for you once you've read all 3 of his books in Mistborn Era 1. The second category that I'm going to discuss as an entry point is for those who love graphic novels. What's that, you say? Mr. Francy, Brandon Sanderson didn't write a graphic novel. He's known for writing regular fantasy novels. And I would say you're absolutely right, with one series that is an exception. And that, my dear friends, would be your entry point if you love graphic novels, the White Sand series. Okay, now, the advantage to all of the series that I'm going to show you is that they are all available on audiobook. Whether you go through Audible or maybe you go through another audiobook platform, I highly recommend graphic audio. Although graphic audio is definitely a luxury, it does cost more, but you get some beautiful music and some amazing sound effects that in no way, shape or form overshadows the narrator's voice. Plus they've hired actors to play the different roles. So I know that some audiobooks on Audible and the like can have music that just takes over the narration voice. They don't, sorry, I'm pointing to the books. They don't in graphic audio. So they cost a lot more, but they are worth it. Or you can go the audio route. If you don't like to read graphic novels, you can listen to them. Also, these books are rather pricey, so that's an option for you as well. I can't give you options on ebooks because I didn't read any of them on ebook. I have issues with my eyes, and so it makes it very hard for me to read an ebook. So just keep that in mind. You may want to do some research if ebooks are the way you want to go. But there are 3 books in this graphic novel series so far, or 3 volumes, I should say. White Sand Volume number 1, White Sand Volume number 2, and White Sand Volume number 3. Now, these books were very expensive for me, and if I was not looking to collect every single book that Brandon Sanderson wrote in physical form as a collector. I would not have purchased these. They took me a lot of effort to find, and when I did, they were incredibly expensive. Some might even say not worth it, honestly, but that's completely up to you. Graphic novel readers, this would be your entry point because they may not look like it, but trust me, they are graphic novels. I would open them to show you, but I've been told that if you show anything from a graphic novel, then it's a spoiler, so I won't do that. But that's an option for my graphic novel readers out there. Option number 3 as an entry point is for my readers or the reader who loves to read standalones. If you're someone who doesn't necessarily want to commit to a series, I have the perfect entry point for you when it comes to Brandon Sanderson, and that would be Warbreaker. At the moment, Warbreaker is a standalone. Brandon Sanderson has said that he plans to write a bridging book that goes between this one, so after this one, and the next series in the timeline order of the Cosmere. I don't want to bog you down in too much. Suffice it to say, there are many different series in the Cosmere world that Sanderson has written, and they're connected by some sort of a timeline. So he is planning on releasing another book after Warbreaker, but he has said that it's not going to be a duology. It will just be a book that's written between the two, but that does follow on from Warbreaker as well. At the moment, it does absolutely stand on its own as a standalone. Now, this edition is the UK edition, and it is a staggering 640 pages long. So you might want to pace yourself with this one, but being a standalone, you're not committing yourself to an entire series. So for standalone fans, this is a great way to go. My 4th entry point is going to be for those who like to read shorter books. That is, you may be a fan of novellas. And if you are, Brandon Sanderson definitely has you covered. Now, there are novellas that work around certain series, but I'm not recommending those to you because you would need to read the series to understand or appreciate them. I'm going to give you a standalone novella that is not connected to a series, and that would have to be this book, The Emperor's Soul. Now, The Emperor's Soul, I will just check for you. This particular edition is 167 pages long. So it is incredibly short for a Brandon Sanderson. In saying that though, I gave this book 5 stars because despite the fact that it was a novella, Brandon Sanderson still had time to pack a punch. It's still an impactful book. So if you like to go the novella route, this may be the entry point for you. My 5th entry point is for those who like to go the other end of the spectrum. Maybe you don't want to read a novella or even a tome, which is 500 pages or more. Maybe you want a challenge when it comes to Brandon Sanderson. Well, how about a double tome? For those of you who love reading 1,000 pages plus, Brandon Sanderson and myself have you covered with the Stormlight Archives. Book number 1 is called The Way of Kings. Now, this is the one-book bind-up of The Way of Kings. It is the US edition from Tor Publishing, in case you're looking for this one specifically. The UK edition does come out in a paperback. It is white, kind of similar in the vein to this Warbreaker edition. And also, there is a 2-parter that exists for every book in this series in the UK edition. So, because it's over 1,000 pages long, there is part 1, which is 600 pages, and part 2, which is, I think, about 500 pages or something like that. Let me specifically see how many pages this one is. Okay, yeah, so this particular edition is just over 1,000 pages, 1,001 pages long. But the paperback UK edition is a lot shorter, as you can see. So that's why it ends up being about 1,100 pages for if you're going the UK route. But I love this series, and I will be getting onto the 4th book very soon, but this is where you would start if you love a challenge and you love a double tome. Just know that this is a massive world that you're going to be entering into. It is not only high fantasy, which is a world from the author's own creation, but it's an epic high fantasy. It is a high fantasy on a grand geographical scale. So please do be mindful of that. Once you've read Way of Kings, you can move on to book number 2 in the Stormlight Archives, which is this book, Words of Radiance. Then you can move on, which is 1,000, I believe, 100 pages long for this edition, 1,100. Then you move on to book number 3, Oathbringer, which is 1,200 pages long. And then you would move on to the book that I haven't read yet, but I've had on me for a while, Rhythm of War. And the reason I haven't is because this is 1,300 pages long. So they seem to grow in count by 100 pages for every single book. They are absolute chunkers, or what you might call a doorstopper. Entry point number 6 is going to be interesting for those of you who do not like fantasy. You might be watching this video and saying to yourself, "Oh, Mr. Francy, I love that you're doing a video on Brandon Sanderson, but I don't think he has anything for me because, I'm sorry to say, I don't like fantasy." Well, don't worry. Myself and Brandon Sanderson still have you covered. You may not like fantasy, but we've got a genre for you that's not fantasy that he writes, that is 2 series that I find to be absolutely fascinating. Both of these series are YA series, and the genre is sci-fi. The first series I'm going to show you is the Skyward series. So, book 1 is called Skyward, and the series takes its name from the first book, the Skyward series. So this is a YA sci-fi. This is the US edition. It is published by Delacorte Press, in case you're looking for it. And this edition is about 505 pages long. So again, it's a tome. Brandon Sanderson does not write short books. After that one, you would go on to Starsight, book number 2. And this one feels shorter, but I'll confirm. Yes, it is. So this one is about 450 pages long. So it's actually less than a tome. After those 2, you'd move on to the third one, which I finally found where I can get a copy of the US edition. It's been taking me forever, but that is this book, Cytonic. I don't know how long that is because I don't have a copy of it on me, but I will be ordering it at the end of the month, and I'm looking forward to having it in my possession very soon. But if those numbers, those page number amounts do scare you a little bit, then don't worry, I have a really good compromise. Another outstanding YA sci-fi series that Brandon Sanderson wrote is the Steelheart series, which is actually called The Reckoners. I'm so sorry. Book 1 is Steelheart. It is the Reckoners series. Now, book 1 Steelheart is 386 pages long if you're going for this edition. Once again, just like with Starsight, with the Skyward series, these editions are published by Delacorte Press. So that's what you'd be looking for if you're looking for these covers. Once you've read Steelheart, you would move on to book number 2, which is Firefight. And then after Firefight, you'd move on to book number 3, Calamity. I absolutely love this series. I read it rather early on, thinking that it was a fantasy series, and I was very surprised with it. Now, for those of you who might be hesitant as to jumping into a sci-fi series, because both this and the Skyward series are YA, there's not a whole lot of sci-fi jargon that's being thrown at you. Quite frankly, the only terminology I had to get used to in this series is the term sparks. And sparks is used as a way to say, you know, oh my gosh, or oh my goodness, like sparks, something happened. And it took me a while to work out, well, hang on, wait, why are we saying sparks? But that's the only thing you really need to wrap your head around. The books are really easy to read, even if you are not a sci-fi enthusiast. But all right, I've left out one entry point, and that is for those of you that are series purists. Maybe you want to read the Cosmere that Brandon Sanderson has written in its original timeline. If you do, I've got you covered. This is going to take a little bit longer because we're going to go through all of the stuff that Brandon Sanderson has written in the Cosmere world. You, my dear series loyalists, you in timeline order would start with the White Sand series. So White Sand Volume 1, White Sand Volume 2, and White Sand Volume 3. Then you would move on to the novella, The Emperor's Soul. After that, you would move on to the standalone, Elantris, and after Elantris, you would read a novella that Brandon Sanderson wrote, which is more like a deleted scene called The Hope of Elantris, a deleted scene from this book. Once you've read those, that's when you would move into Mistborn Era Number 1. However, you could absolutely premise this series with its originating novella, which is this book, Mistborn the 11th Metal. The way I see it, having read the 11th Metal, I very much feel that it's a prologue to this book. This book ends right before this book begins, so it's the perfect way to introduce yourself to the series if you're okay to read a preceding novella. After you read Mistborn Era 1, you would read the final novella, which is this book. Actually, I have a copy of it on me. I don't know why I'm doing that. Mistborn Secret History. This, we follow a character in book number 1 named Kelsia. For a reason that I won't give away because it's a spoiler, we don't follow Kelsia in books 2 or 3. In this book, we find out what Kelsia has been up to during books 2 and 3. The reason you would not read this before you read any of the 3 books in the original Mistborn series is because this book does give away spoilers for books 2 and book 3. So, let's do that again because that might have been a bit confusing. For Mistborn Era 1, you would start with Mistborn the 11th Metal. You would then move on to The Final Empire, then The Well of Ascension, then The Hero of Ages, and you would close out the series with this book, Mistborn Secret History. Then you would want to take a break, and the reason for that is because Mistborn has 2 eras. That's right, 2 separate eras that are so completely different because there's a massive time jump between the 2. It's about 300 years. So the best thing you can do as a refresher is to take a break. For that break, I would recommend then reading Warbreaker, just to get yourself away from the Mistborn world for a moment and just, read this as a standalone. Then you would move on to Mistborn Era 2. You would read the first book in Mistborn Era 2, The Alloy of Law. Then you would read this book, Elementor Jack and the Pits of Atlantia, which is a novella. Then you would read book 2 in Mistborn Era 2, Shadows of Self. And then you would read book 3 in Mistborn Era 2, which is The Bands of Mourning. Mistborn Era 2 book number 4 is currently in the process of being published. It has already been written. Once you've read the second era of Mistborn, you would then move on to Stormlight Archives. So you would read The Way of Kings, Stormlight Archives book 1. You would then read Stormlight Archives Book 2, Words of Radiance. You would then read Stormlight Archives Book 3, Oathbringer. And you would then close it out with Stormlight Archives Book 4, Rhythm of War. Once you've read those books, you will be up to date with the Cosmere, aside from 2 novellas in the Stormlight Archives, which I'll quickly put up on the screen. Edge Dancer and Dawn Shard. Once you've read those 2 novellas, there are 2 standalone novellas that are incredibly short, and I'm trying to remember what the heck they're called. I might just have to put them up on the screen. But anyway, here's the first one, and here's the second one. Once you've read all of those books, you would be completely caught up to, at the time of filming, all of the books that have been released in the Cosmere universe. Alright, so to everyone who is looking to take on a Brandon Sanderson Cosmere journey, I hope you have as much fun as I did. I came into reading Mistborn book number 1, The Final Empire, in March of 2020, and came into 2020 not even knowing who Brandon Sanderson was. I'd never heard of him, if you can believe it. And after reading The Final Empire, I just absolutely fell in love. I caught the Sanderson bug. I became a fan of my dear Brando Sando, and decided to read all the books in the Cosmere, and I pretty much got there, aside from Rhythm of War and Dawnshard. But pretty much got there. And I have to say that if you love fantasy, then you will love Brandon Sanderson's works. He is one of the most well-renowned fantasy authors out there at the moment. So congratulations on starting your journey, and I hope that this video helped. But in the meantime, that is where I am going to leave it, letting you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love. Be kind and love one another, and of course, as I always say, happy reading!